Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the National Humanities Center Humanities in Class webinar series. Tonight's session is titled Essentials of Online Learning for the Humanities Crisis Version. And I'm really pleased to be joined tonight by Jennifer Bramer-Elliott, who is associated with the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. My name is Andy Mink. I'm the Vice President of Education for the Center. I often greet you and welcome you to our sessions, our evening sessions like this by noting that you're probably just coming out of your classrooms or maybe just got home and you finished dinner with your family. It's pretty difficult to imagine all the circumstances that you're facing, untangling plans that you've put tons of time in, being there for your kids, nurturing your students in what is probably a scary process, even if on the surface they think that they're glad to be out of school. Can't thank you enough for all of your hard work, and I hope that the resources we're able to provide you in the work we do at the center, including a pop-up video, webinar like this, are helpful. I am trying a new microphone tonight, so I see Susie and Timothy and Angela are all chatting in the box. If you guys just don't mind letting me know that you can hear my voice. There's nothing worse than talking for a certain amount of time and realizing nobody can hear you. Thanks, Bonnie. Having said that, I also hope that when we share these resources that we'll also connect you with each other. Please do use this time to connect with other educators. I'm seeing as you're introducing yourself, folks from literally all over the country, from Cupertino to Florida, to Celestines in Florida, I believe, up to Massachusetts, all around the country. Please take some time to share resources in the chat box. Let folks know how you're approaching your curriculum in your classrooms. And it seems to me that we're probably going to focus as much on building community and building that learning environment as we are on any specific content tonight. So if you've got practices or approaches that you've used in the last week or so, please do use them as well. As always, I want to make sure I acknowledge Libby and Mike for all their hard work on the team. We're all working remotely as you are and using online tools the best to our ability to continue our projects and our initiatives and the support that we hope to provide you. The center is closed for the next 30 days minimum, so all of our fellows have returned to their home universities. In some cases, they have traveled internationally to be with us for the year, so they've gone home and likely won't be returning. We will be business as usual though, so if you're in an online course, if you are planning to perhaps join us for a summer program, as of right now, everything is still in place, much like you probably tell your students and the folks you work with, you know, we're planning for the best, but we're also trying to make sure that we're prepared for the worst. Because you can't use our physical space, I would encourage you to use our website. I've got the URL there at the bottom. This is a site that we've worked hard to make searchable and indexable for both the scholarly content and our education programs. You may have been with us a few weeks ago when we did our first pop-up webinar of the year and worked with Mary Wabel from University of Pittsburgh on how to contextualize the coronavirus. It's funny how even just a few weeks later, this context seems so much different. But it seems to me this is what the humanities can do, right? It can help us understand these complexities around us and describe them and articulate them and respond to them. Mary does a great job of giving you some long view historical context on disease and epidemics and the way we've reacted to it. Of course, at the time on March the 4th, we weren't quite sure where coronavirus was going to go for the United States, but as you're working with your students, it might make sense to put it in a broader context so they realize that this is not the first time that we face this and that our responses can be measured in that way. This recording is online right now. You can find it on our website. Feel free to share it broadly with your colleagues or your students, or maybe build it into some of the lessons you might be creating. Angela, there is a link on our website under webinars, and when you go there, the past webinars, the registration button is toggled to a recording, and you can just simply, that button takes you right to YouTube where you can sign up. When we try to do these pop-up webinars, we actually skip the registration page and just give you the straight registration, so that's why you may not have seen it. A couple of quick announcements about our series. Because of the upside down world that we're suddenly living in, we've had a couple of sessions that we've had to cancel, likely to be rescheduled for next year. That includes Stephanie Jones-Rogers from University of California, Berkeley. That was actually scheduled to be tonight. And then next week, we had hoped to work with Motley Warsh from University of Pittsburgh. Both of those sessions have been canceled and will be rescheduled ideally for the 2021 academic year. A couple of quick announcements before we begin tonight's session. We are currently accepting applications for the Teachers Advisory Council. This is a really important group that works with us every single year to make sure that we're staying relevant and connected to the classroom. We've got a lot of both past and current TAC members with us in the room tonight. Duke Ritchie over Chattanooga and Lisa up in New Hampshire. I see Carl, as he often is, just outside of Philadelphia, is with us. Bonnie in Cupertino, Jedediah down in Charlotte, Sarah in Wisconsin. If you choose to apply, we are accepting your applications until May the 4th. And part of your year-long tenure will be spending 2 days and 2 nights in North Carolina with us. So we will, once we've selected next year's cohort, we'll work with you on those arrangements. You might have a lot more time now than you thought you would. Each week I tell you about the online courses that we are offering. We currently have 5 courses that are running. We're going to launch 3 more on May the 26th. Depending on how the school year goes, we may actually increase that. And this is a way for you to get not just professional development, but again, this sort of immersive online experience that can be translated to your classroom. These courses are currently open for registration, and I want to remind all my Los Angeles Unified folks that we have been pre-approved by LAUSD so that these courses are worth 1 salary point. So if that makes a difference for you, as I think it likely will, please take a look at that registration. And then finally, again, assuming that our summer programs are on as scheduled, we'll be working with A.D. Carson at the last week in June on a 5-day institute called Beyond February. We still have a few slots left for that. And then we have a 2-week institute later in July that has been closed for registration, but I know some of you in the room have applied, and I'll tell you again that we are planning to do that, and you'll get more information soon. So those are all sort of the nuts and bolts of introduction. I want to remind each of you that that chatting in the box tonight is going to be a big part of our presentation and conversation. When Jen begins to share her work, we're going to be reflecting a lot on not only the experiences you've had that are successful, but maybe some of the current realities that you're facing. So use that chat box as much as you can, and I will, as the moderator, bring your questions forth. I'll make sure that we address them in some form and hopefully give you some resources tonight. I want to introduce Jennifer Bramer Elliott, who is currently an adjunct assistant at University of North Carolina, soon to be working with another big university here in the Triangle. I've known Jen for a little while, since our time overlapped at University of Virginia, and I know that she has spent a lot of time thinking about instructional design and about tools and about ways to both teach and learn online. And as I open her microphone here, I also want to, you know what, in some ways I'm giving the same kind of introduction I gave to Mary Wabel just a few weeks ago, which is, you know, Mary is an historian. I found myself saying, don't forget, folks, she's not a doctor. And in this case, Jen's going to share a lot of different resources with you, but I don't think we're here to tell you what to do tomorrow. We're going to try to provide context. We're going to try to stay true to the best practices of humanities education. We'll try to give you some really clear, tools and tricks and tips, but the truth is there's a bazillion ideas and tools and software and things on your computer that you can go online and find, or maybe go to a Facebook group and hear about, or talk to each other. What we want to do, I think, is try to condense that and give you just some really clear parameters of how you build the next 2 months of your teaching life. Hey, Jen, can you hear me just a few miles down the road?
I can hear you, Andy.
Great, thank you. Jen, I'm going to give you the mouse, and I'm going to invite you to lead this conversation. I have a feeling, because we didn't help ourselves by calling this a crisis edition. There are a lot of people feeling the velocity of what's going on right now and what they need, and the kinds of approaches that they're doing in the classroom. Some of that will be content-based, I'm sure, instructional based, and some of it's just going to be staying in community with your kids, because that's such a huge part of teaching. Before you get started, if you don't mind, I'd like to just ask you a quick question.
Sure.
You've worked in this space for a long time. You've both witnessed and taught and trained in an online environment. What's the one thing, do you think, that you really, really wish that you could replicate in an online environment, but it's a struggle right now. Is there anything missing? Anything that you want to accomplish as a teacher that you just can't do?
I would say no. I think you can do everything. I think it looks different, and
Mhm.
I think it takes a much more deliberate effort. I think the biggest piece for me is being able to create this sense of community and connectedness between you and your students, and then the connectedness between and among your students. And I think that it has been historically something that hasn't gone well in online environments. There's been a lot of content delivery, which isn't too far from the lecture face-to-face world at universities. But I think in the K-12 environment, there's an opportunity to really create um, more valuable connections between students
Yeah.
and then between you and them. And so I don't think there's anything you can't necessarily do, except I did have someone say they were trying to teach point in ballet.
Yeah.
That I'm not sure exactly how that works, but it can be done, I'm sure.
Maybe so. Thank you for answering it that way. First of all, it's very optimistic, and I suspect that most of the educators in the room tonight, including our university folks, I see Patrick Deers in the room, and a past fellow, Mara O'Neill, has signed up as well. When you think about educating in this online environment, um, I bet a lot of folks spend in a face-to-face way even the first week of their school year building community, getting to know their kids, having them do team building kinds of things. And it's almost as if we're starting from scratch right now, except we're not. You do have a relationship with kids, and so how can we extend it now in this online environment might be the key.
Yeah, I think one kind of really cool thing about this is, although your students have been getting to know you throughout the year, and we're late in the year now, so they know you as a teacher, you're going to seem really different to them when you're in your house and your cat walks by, or your kid walks by. All of the real things that we're going to have to try to manage and balance as we move literally school into our homes. So I think there's some opportunity there for students to see their teachers as a little more human, perhaps, and in a different context that I think could be really positive for them.
And I think there are a lot of people's cats are going to become low-key famous.
Yes. And I have a dog that you might hear pipe up, FYI.
So I've given you the mouse, but I think that's actually one of those takeaways that I would underscore. And I actually talk to the lead scholars in these webinars quite often about this, which is don't worry about it being casually professional. If your kid and your dog and your life is kind of being heard and part of the session, that's completely appropriate. So that might be one takeaway to start with.
Yes. Yeah. And you're human. We are all in a situation that none of us have. Maybe some of you have, but I personally have never imagined. I am blown away, and just I had a group of colleagues, there were about 5 of us, started a Facebook page, and we're like, we should get together. We've got this skill set and people need to know what to do here. And less than a week later, we have over 13,000 people. So there is this race to figure out how to fill the gap. And I'm not sure that it can realistically be filled in the time frame with the resources that everyone has at their disposal. But I'm so impressed with the thousands, literally, of teachers who are doing everything they can, not only to help create this incredible experience for their students, but to support other teachers. Gives me chills just talking about it. It's really awesome.
So before you get started, Jen, I'm going to mention that you added a Google document early on and it scrolled out of sight. So I'm about to re-add it to
Okay.
the chat box.
Yeah, so
And
Andy and I were talking, at 5:45 or something, and we decided to share a resource list with you that has unfortunately not been put in a format that's clean enough, but it's there for the moment. Can you can you all hear my dog?
we can definitely hear you, Bob.
Oh my God, sorry. I
That's
put
all
my
right.
son in charge. Hang on.
You go do that and I'll say that
Welcome
for
to reality.
that's right. For, my goodness.
Oh my God, sorry.
You go
Yeah,
do that and I'll talk for a moment.
okay.
The Google Doc for the link that we put should be a publicly shareable link. You're welcome to share it with your colleagues. You're welcome to republish it. You're welcome to add to it. And that's a document that has some of the tools listed. We're going to go through ways to use them, and we're going to allude to some of them and maybe describe some of them in more depth. But at least it's a place to get started. And then you got to answer the question real fast for Michelle, and then we'll move forward. German Shepherd or Mastiff?
Well, I had a Mastiff, but this is a Newfoundland.
Here you go. Thank you. All right, Jen, tell us about the
Good guess.
essentials of online learning.
Okay. I just want to say, when Andy and I started discussing this as a topic, I was really thrilled to be able to talk about it. It's one of my favorite things, obviously. And then completely overwhelmed in trying to think about what are the essentials? What does everybody do with a week when they're trying to figure out how to put their just move your class online? I think all of us know that that is not something you do in a week generally or ever, and that it's a really involved process. So what I wanted to bring to you tonight is a couple of things. One of them is we've had to focus on the real practicality of getting these courses switched over, flipped up, what we're going to do with these kids. And so I wanted to bring in a little bit more of kind of the history of ed tech and how we got to this place where we are suddenly faced with 100 tools and we're not really sure what to do with them. And ultimately, the tool you'll find isn't the thing that matters. It's what you do with it. It's the way that you create an experience for a student. And the experience itself could use 10 different tools and still accomplish the same thing. So we'll dig in a little bit deeper to that. Okay. Okay, you ready? Because this is about media and technology and learning. So this is one of my favorite things to talk about where we started. This is the precursor to the slide projector. It's called the Magic Lantern. And the Magic Lantern projected images on glass plates, and then they were shown in darkened rooms to students. And by the end of World War I, Chicago's public school system had about 8,000 lantern slides. You may seem like that could be a familiar experience to you, even though it was way back when. Sorry, I'm driving two different things here. So at the turn of the century, there was the Keystone Viewing Company, and they began to market stereoscopes, which are essentially like Google glasses. They were really popular for entertainment, and then someone decided, oh, these would be great to illustrate points made in lectures. Moving on to 1925, the New York City's Board of Education was the first organization to actually send lessons to schools through radio stations. So over the next couple of decades, we had the schools of the air, and they began to broadcast programs to millions of students and mass education. Even commercial networks like CBS and NBC poured tons of money into creating these classroom broadcasts or the textbooks of the air. And there was a quote in some paper later about this that said, then the enthusiasm died out. I think we know this story, right? Technology du jour. And the projector. We know this one. Initially used by the US military for training in World War II. The overhead projector then quickly spread to schools and other organizations around the country. Sorry, I'm trying to drive two things. Hope y'all don't mind.
Jen, if that mouse is getting wiggly on you, you can also use the button, the arrows on your keyboard.
Oh, thanks, Andy. That's good to know. Okay. And then, of course, by 1958, we were talking about educational television. And by the 60s, we had more than 50 channels of TV that included educational programming that, of course, aired across the country. Oh yeah, that's a lot better. Okay. So we then had the film strip projector. I'm pretty sure that that exact one was in my classroom at some point. And then it became really modernized like this. Right. And then moving into 1982, we started to get personal computers. And this, of course, was the cure to accessibility, which we all know is one of our greatest barriers still today. 1985, maybe you've heard of Oregon Trail. This began sort of the gaming in technology and learning. And by 2011, there were over 65 million copies of Oregon Trail that were sold. So this became a real hit in a way to think about teaching and learning that people really hadn't embraced before. Oh, and then in 1991, the World Wide Web. So the internet forced and continues to force us to really rethink about how learning happens. We had the MOOC explosion connected to online classrooms. We see that that doesn't really change a lot about the way people learn. And what did change with the internet was the idea that the teacher holds all the knowledge, that the teacher is there to deliver content. And so the role of the teacher has had to shift dramatically because they are no longer necessarily the experts or the keeper of the knowledge. And then raise your hand. You don't have to really raise your hand if you were in a classroom in 2004 like me, and we had the savior of the classroom, the whiteboard, the interactive whiteboard. So I did research on this as a master's student when I was teaching third grade, and I went around and just observed and did some surveying of teachers and the ways in which they were using whiteboards. And mostly, I found that teachers used interactive whiteboards as color chalkboards because essentially the kind of support they needed to develop a real learning experience that created interactivity with students and the technology wasn't wholly available to them. And then of course we got to the e-reader that has transformed the textbook industry, right? I think we're all still using textbooks, but we have another option if we want to. And I was a little bit blown away to think about this today, that the iPad was 10 years ago. Oh, that's so crazy. So we had this explosion, the iPad is going to save us, the Chromebook is going to save us, but if you don't have applications in a technology that transform the way someone interacts with the content, then you don't have anything but another way to deliver media. And you may have heard all the craze about immersive learning environments, virtual reality, augmented reality. This happens to be an area of specialty for me. I've studied how people learn with games and simulations in augmented and virtual reality. And I've done a lot of analysis on the content that's out there. And what we find is that people generally use this as a way to convey content instead of really being able to harness the power of putting someone in a particular place to learn something differently. And then I just wanted to leave you with an image on this technology here, which is the stereoscope. These two technologies are essentially the same. So now you got all this technology. Let's go. Just put your class online. That's all you have to do, right? This is simple. I hate that I can't really talk to you all.
You can talk to me and I'll channel
I'm
them.
going to talk to you. Okay, good. So this is really the important part. You have all of these technologies. Your students have access to all of these technologies, but both you and them have access to too many technologies. And while there are lots of things available to help us, what we really need to know is what to do with them to create a meaningful learning experience. So we've got Zoom, Hangouts, Meets, Adobe Connect, GoToMeeting, Vlog, VoiceThread. Hopefully, wherever you're working in a district or with a university, maybe some of these choices have been limited by the learning management system that you're using, like Sakai or Moodle or Blackboard. What you have to do is not necessarily try on all of these technologies, but you want to ask the question of, what do you want this technology to do for you? Do you need a mini lecture? And I emphasize mini because we never want a full-term lecture online. We want them to be short with essential content and really make the rest of the supporting materials easy for people to find. Do you need an interactive video like VoiceThread? So VoiceThread is a way that people can post a video, and then their classmates and or professor can actually comment on that with video, voice, text, and those can all be embedded within a PowerPoint presentation, and then you could also do a picture within a picture. So it allows you to have a PowerPoint with your image in it also if you're going to be narrating or something like that. Do you need something that is asynchronous? Do you need a way to connect with your students synchronously? Do you need a way for them to connect synchronously? So the question I think right now is, how do we make this list smaller? Having been in this group on Facebook that now is more than 13,000 people, what I'm finding is that there are so many helpful and wonderful people providing so many resources that it's really difficult to get to the bottom of it. It's really hard to find out what is the thing that I need. And I think there are going to be multiple ways for you all to find that answer, and it will depend on what's available to you, what's available to your students, what does your district have in terms of bandwidth. So some of those decisions will be called out for you, but we really want to think about what we're going to do with it.
Jen, I'm going to push in a little bit further on that point, if you don't mind, because I heard you say something that caught my ear, and that was you said something along the lines of some of you may have had the choices for you if you're lucky. And I thought it was a sort of an interesting turn of phrase, because so often educators and perhaps folks who signed up tonight, they want to add, or they want to know what that other thing is that will be better. But it almost sounds like you're suggesting that the parameters, the guardrails that different districts have put, and I've seen comments in the box of folks being limited to what they can do, but it sounds like you're suggesting that's not a bad thing right now, and to figure out what those guardrails are, and then even inside of those guardrails, there's still plenty of ways that you can do something meaningful.
Absolutely. There's a really wonderful book that I can share a link to later called Creativity from Constraints. And so, although it may seem limiting to have your district or your university choose these particular tools, there are so many tools with so many capabilities that it truly is overwhelming if you're just shopping the tool. And for us as educators, what we really have to do is work backwards from what do we need the tool to do for us, and what do we need it to do for our students. And so I believe that in most cases, even though your technology that's available to you might seem simple, even simple technologies can be used in a really robust way to develop an experience that your students can truly learn from and truly engage with each other and truly engage with you. So that's what I'm saying, Andy. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
So I just wanted to give you some advice. Beg, borrow, steal. I mean that with all sincerity. And I think that the one really beautiful thing about teachers is they're generous people. So you don't find them hoarding content or hoarding tools or hoarding methods. In fact, right now, what I see is the opposite. And so that's kind of a completely different problem to have, where people are sharing so much that you just kind of don't know where to start. And so I hope that's what we can kind of get some rails around tonight in this conversation. So this might seem like simple advice, and I'm going to hope that everyone who's a teacher has already done this. But the most important thing that you can do is set your course goals, set your class goals, set your lesson goals, figure out what your learning objectives are. Because if you don't have those things really concretely laid out for you and for your students, it makes everything else that you do in terms of trying to develop an interaction, in terms of assessment, in terms of materials, that much harder. So I would encourage all of you to perhaps revisit your lesson plans, perhaps revisit your curriculum guide, and really think through what do I need my students to do or know at the end of this X, whether it's a lesson or module, whatever it might be. And start broad and then begin to whittle that down in a really concrete way so that you can say, when my student finishes this course, they can do this. I will know they can do this because they'll be able to demonstrate it this way.
Jen, I'm going to take
Yeah,
us sideways just a little bit
sure.
because to me, that's a super important point that I, again, would like to underscore. And that is, it seems like for teaching, successful teaching, so much of it is formative, right? So much of it
Right,
um, is having the experience and the expertise to read body language, to read the vibe of individual kids and of the
right.
class collectively, of being able to tell if kids get it or not, whatever that means.
Yep.
So when you mention things like video and audio threads and these kinds of tools, it seems to me that getting as close as you can to actually hearing their voice and having them present to them what they understand rather than kind of do it in a flat two-dimensional text-based way might
Mhm.
be really important for formative assessment if you're trying to figure out if they're understanding what's going on, understanding versus mastery, right? And so it seems like, sometimes when you talk about voice threads and video threads, it might seem like bells and whistles, but it seems like it would be really critical for a formative activity.
So one of the things that I love about a tool like VoiceThread or video capability is the way that you are assessing a student. Well, there are two things you can do at once. You can teach them through the activity of having them create something, but you can also assess them in that way. And
Right.
so it's really hard for a student to get by with memorizing something when they have to really know and apply that knowledge to create a product that demonstrates what they can do and know. And it's also really valuable to have this opportunity for them to have feedback between each other. And I find that students are really, um, when you prompt them and guide them in the right way, the questions they ask each other are as valuable as any test you might give them. And I will also pose for my students to have them, they create the questions for their classmates. So they might actually create a lesson and then have questions. And in a tool like VoiceThread, their classmates will be answering those questions, but the questions are developed in such a way they aren't yes or no, right or wrong. They require the student to really have a deep understanding of a particular set of content to know what to do. And you know that they can't complete this assignment if they don't.
Right. We'll talk about
So
perhaps
yeah, go ahead.
before we're done, maybe we'll talk about the digital divide and sort of the lack of resources. But it seems like kids are so the TikTok generation is so used to filming those things that the formative part becomes not just the content they're sharing, the knowledge they're demonstrating, but also it helps us figure out why they're not doing something. Our friend Jedediah, who's on our teacher advisory council, I saw recently posted on social media. Are you guys kidding? Kids don't do their work when they come to school. What makes us think they're going to do it when we stay home?
Right.
But when they're in school, you can start to suss out why that's happening, and that's much more difficult in an online format if there's just nothing that appears. So maybe these kinds of video and audio multimedia um, triggers can at least help understand what it is they're struggling with, whether it's academic or other.
I think you bring up a really huge concern for me personally right now, and that is our most vulnerable population of students. These are our students who are homeless. These are our students who are hungry. These are our students who have to do all of this on their phone. Although we have, I think there's 60 companies now offering Wi-Fi and broadband services free especially for kids in school. Um, the digital divide is huge. And when this is our only platform, I think that we will see in the next 2 months really how huge the inequity is when it comes to access to just tools like a phone or a laptop. I know that I've talked to people here in Chapel Hill and their schools in Durham. Their schools have been providing Chromebooks for everyone, but that makes the assumption then the student goes home and has Wi-Fi, and that just often isn't the case. It also assumes that maybe that student has dinner and is really worried about whether or not they're going to complete an assignment for school. So it brings to the forefront really the interconnectedness between um, the human piece of our lives, poverty, wealth, health, and education. And when we're faced with a crisis like this, those things can't be disentangled. But I think that having everything sort of radically quickly shift online is going to highlight those things in a way that we've probably never had held up to the mirror before.
Thank you.
Okay, we did go off to the side for a minute, but that was good.
Good.
So set your goals. These are things that if you're a teacher, you know how to do. And if you don't have your goals, then obviously you can't decide what resources or content you need. This is another place for us to really be mindful of what our students have at their disposal. My son is home from App State, and he has extended spring break until Monday, but he doesn't have any books because he's on spring break. So the idea that our students have taken their backpacks home and have all their books and all the things that they might need with them, we just kind of have to really throw out the window. We have to assume that what we're creating for them, that they don't have the things that they need available to them if we don't provide them. So I think this is a fundamental kind of just piece that we've got to make sure that we cover. And those resources could look like lots of things. They could be videos, they could be readings, they could be mini clips of you sharing in a lecture format, many things. But I think we really have to think through what do our kids have available to them right now in this particular situation. Once you really understand what you need them to learn and the resources that they need to get there, then you can start to define the experience through which they will learn. And although I know everyone is overwhelmed and rushed, and this is just trying to figure this out, this is a space where the online learning experience can really rise above even a classroom experience. So there's a way for us to create interactions with students. There's a way for us to develop role-based scenarios. There's a way for us to give opportunities for them to work in groups, to provide feedback to each other and allow us to provide feedback to them in ways that are managed differently than a face-to-face classroom, but can sometimes be much more powerful. And let me know if Andy questions are coming up. I do not because I don't have the chat box. Okay. So and let's just assess them. Why don't we? We'll just put this online and then we'll assess them. So I know that in fact today, I believe it was, the state of New York is eliminating standardized testing. We can all only hope that happens everywhere. But that being said, the space we're in right now does not lend itself to a neat way of assessment. And a lot of the things I've seen in the groups where people are looking for support are questions about, for example, proctoring, but I think those are really the minimal challenges that we're facing. How do you measure success when students don't have an equal playing field? How do you measure success when you have to completely redefine what your learning outcomes are? How do you measure success when what you thought was going to be your form of assessment isn't can't even be implemented? So this question of measuring success right now, I think is probably one of the hardest that people are facing. And I want to take this moment to say to you, you don't have to do everything right, and you don't have to do everything all the way right now. I know that everyone has had a week or two, and it is wholly insufficient to really think through how we can do that well. That being said, I would encourage you for whatever assignments you develop, whatever experience, to create a rubric. What are the measures? What are the standards that someone needs to meet to demonstrate that they can do this thing? So make sure that you give them the rails in a rubric, so students aren't floundering to figure out what success looks like, at least to you. Um, and that's a really difficult thing. I don't minimize what that means to you as a teacher. So my tactical advice to you is to keep it simple. Um, right now, you are overwhelmed, I'm sure, by having your kids and dog, everything else running around you. You can hear in my voice, I'm not going to joke about having coronavirus, but you know, people people are afraid right now of much larger things than how we're going to assess students. Um, that being said, our students are also really afraid. So, what I want to encourage you to think about as you um, move into this kind of practical step of developing your course, please keep this simple. Try to make it as visually simple, as cognitively simple as you possibly can, and really keep connected with your students to help understand what their barriers are and then be able to adjust when you can. So, the fun part, introduce yourself. This is the place where we were discussing earlier. You just met my dog Jake. Um, this is a true opportunity for your students to see you in a way that they may not have ever seen you before, and it is also a way for them to understand that you're human, that everyone is vulnerable right now in a way that no one's ever expected. So make a video, introduce yourself, make it light, make a joke if you can, if you're good at it. Make a joke if you're bad at it too, because they'll think it's funny anyway. All right, let's see. So I'm getting into a little bit of the nitty gritty now, into what your course should look like. Make a navigation video for your course and really simplify this in the most, I mean, uh, I don't even know how to emphasize this enough. Um, I'm gonna show you an example in just a minute though. Let's see.
So, Jen, just to clarify
Yeah,
for one moment,
yeah,
there are a lot of folks, I see this in the chat box. I certainly hear it from the teachers we work with. There are a lot of folks who use Google Classroom, who use various kinds of
yeah.
online resources as supplements to their face-to-face teaching. But even then, even if you feel like your kids are already know how to navigate your Google site or already know how to sort of address the syllabus that you've got in electronic format, it sounds like what you're saying is do this anyway because now they can't lean on seeing you face to face and asking questions in person to supplement the use of those tools. So they are in some ways approaching it maybe not for the first time, but the first time by themselves.
Yeah, they're alone in this largely, many of them. We all know that lots of our students have a parent walking them through this, and we also know that many of our students do not. So, although we think of them as quote unquote digital natives, a term that I really hate, um, they don't know. They don't know the navigation of your course. They have never had to think about it in the structured format that you're presenting to them necessarily. And so my my advice to you is to design it as simply as possible, but also walk them through it no matter how simple it seems, because they will appreciate it and it will help them reduce that cognitive load of just navigating their space so they can truly get to learning. Um, what I have shared with you here right now is just an example from a course that I had in Sakai. And I would condense everything by week for this course. And all anyone had to do was click on the week, and it would take them to everything that they needed. I'm going to move forward and then go back for a second. So I'm sorry that I couldn't take you to this page so that you could see it more clearly. But what I have here are the learning objectives for the week. I have all the materials that they need, all of the things that they need to do, all of the assignments they need to submit, and then I actually link them to the technologies that they're going to use to do that. So in this particular week, this module, see like at the bottom of the page, if you all can see that, I hope you can, there's a link to VoiceThread. So my students aren't going back to the navigation pane and then trying to find where VoiceThread is. Everything they need is on this one page. And so I encourage you, if you can figure out a way to put it all by week or by module or by lesson on one page where they have all the things, this is really a way to eliminate just cognitive load for them so they can really focus on what you want them to learn.
Yeah, and that doesn't
Um,
seem to be a trivial way to describe it, right? It's not, keeping it simple and clear cut and clean. It's cognitively, what did you call it? Cognitive. You're reducing the cognitive load, right? You're
right,
just visually uncomplicating it so they can see what they're supposed to do.
right. And so I'll take you back to the slide I had before, which was, I thought I went past this, yes. So in creating this course in Sakai, what you see on the left-hand side is my view. And in Sakai, there are buttons that will take you to the same thing in different ways. So there's an assignment button that'll take you to this thing. There's an assignment button that takes you to the gray book. The gray book takes you to this. And so there are multiple ways with those buttons to do the same thing. What I do for my students is always eliminate all the buttons that duplicate anything. And I try to only provide them the buttons that they need to get the information that's going to help them navigate this space. So really trying to simplify that space for them is very important. And it seems like a simple thing in theory, but a lot of our LMS systems have all of these things built in and we feel obligated to use them. But I encourage you to think about condensing those to the smallest number possible to really help your students navigate clearly and not have to think through, how do I get to the place where I submit my assignment? And that takes us back to the one pager, which is having it all here. And so while I can link to assignments, they don't need that link. I put that here, it goes directly where I need it to be, but my students don't have to see that. So it keeps it simpler for them. All right.
Catherine asked for clarification. Yes, Sakai is the learning management system or the online platform. I think the suggestions that Jen is making, though, would apply to any of the online formats, Moodle, WordPress, Sakai, etc.
Yeah, any platform that you're using is going to have a lot of options for you. And I will say this isn't what you were bringing up earlier, Andy. If they don't, then you're lucky.
Yeah.
if it's simple, that's a good thing for you. Yes, I'm sorry though, but Sakai is just another platform like Moodle, like Canvas, like Blackboard, and or Google Classroom.
And that probably is going to be limited by district or university.
Correct. Yeah, so the University of North Carolina uses Sakai. We used Moodle at Virginia, I believe. And then I know a lot of the K-12 classrooms are using Google. The good thing about Google is it is it has a very simple design generally, and so I think that's a good thing for teachers trying to create something in this space. Any other questions, Andy, for that?
There's a lot of great conversation happening, and I'm letting
Okay.
it kind of flow. One question I actually have, though, I'm going to go backwards to maybe this page.
Okay.
Do you ever see any benefit in adding a glossary of how to navigate? And I'm sort of, I know Catherine's question about Sakai isn't a glossary worthy, meaning you wouldn't want to define Sakai, but I'm looking at this page, and even things like synchronously, or do kids need to hear those things and have some kind of glossary that understands it?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I did not include that as part of this talk, but I actually have a whole section in the first week of my course on how to be online, the glossary of terms, what do these things mean, how to be successful in an online learning environment. So there's a whole set of, just practical skills that go with this that have nothing to do with content and nothing to do with management. They are just basic fundamental things that your students need to know in order to understand, for example, synchronous or asynchronous.
Right.
This particular course is for physicians, and even physicians don't necessarily know what that means. So it's
Did you say
important to
especially?
go ahead,
Sorry, I thought maybe you said especially physicians.
especially no, not especially, no. So this is these are the kinds of things where you might assume, especially that our students have this skill set or they know these things, they know these terms. I would encourage you to really clearly define those in the very first meeting or week or um, whatever your first interaction is with them, so they do understand what those things mean. So I don't use a glossary necessarily, Andy, but I link them to, I share a lot of articles, not a lot. I share articles with them and also videos about what success looks like and how to really help yourself be successful when you're in this kind of environment. And it's different from face to face for sure. So this particular slide that you see in front of you, I hope is not too overwhelming. I took a screenshot because this is what I had for a weekly assignment for this particular group. And I hope that you all can not become overwhelmed by all of the options, but also be able to take advantage of the fun and exciting ways that you can really create interaction among your students in a way that helps them learn. This kind of environment lends itself so naturally to role play. And what you're seeing here is this is a public health course where the students were taking on particular roles in a particular crisis, and I unfortunately couldn't share, I have broken down what their names are in part of this, but because of FERPA, I couldn't show that part of it. But they're all given a particular assignment individually, and then they have a role to play within a group. And then those two groups are interacting with each other. And it sounds complicated to explain to them at first, but when you can walk them through it, when you give them really concise directions and they understand what to do, they come away with a kind of understanding that you just can't get from giving content to people. And it's also a way where you can, as we discussed before, really assess, even if it's not a formal assessment, what they're getting from this. Do they really know what they're talking about? And you'll see here at the bottom too that I have the places exactly where they go for their groups, and there is where they submit their assignment. So keeping it simple. So the one thing that makes online learning good or not is community. And it's the same thing that makes a regular classroom good or not. And so I want you all to really feel empowered by the tools you have right now to meet with your students individually if that's an option. I know that some people are teaching these mass courses where they just can't do that. But find a way to connect with them. And if you can't individually connect with them, give them the opportunity to connect with you. And that could be in terms of virtual office hours that you hold by video. It could be with a phone call. It could be that simple. But really being able to keep them connected, because this is a space where people can easily fall off. And you do have to have a way to monitor what your students are doing or not doing. Most of our LMS systems allow you to see that in real time. You can see exactly how much time a student has spent on any part of a page in the LMS. So um, be proactive, reach out to them, ask them what's going on with them. Because I find that generally students don't just slack. There's usually a reason that they aren't able to do what you're asking them to do. I encourage you also to be mindful with yourself and be patient as you try to navigate something that is wholly new and wholly overwhelming. And how are you supposed to take care of these kids when you're just trying to figure out how to get your content into a learning management system? Be patient with yourself, because this is not something that you're going to probably be totally successful with in the next week. Just going to say that. So give yourself room to grow, and then give yourself room to learn from that too. You're going to try things. I still try things. I will do something with one group that is amazing, and we will come out with this incredible product, and there's amazing learning that happens. I'll do it with the next group, and it's a total dud. So there's a lot of trial and error. Um, you have to design mindfully, but you also have to be flexible enough to know that sometimes what worked for one group isn't going to work for another. So be flexible. Understand that your students are dealing with huge things that might be more important than the topic du jour. Keep perspective on what's important. Help accommodate what it is they're dealing with. Do whatever you need to support them, and then do whatever you need to support yourself. So there are lots of groups out there. I know this particular Facebook group, I posted it in our resources, has a mindfulness class. They did one yesterday and I didn't get to go. But really take the time to take care of yourself, and try to ease your own mind and take care of your emotional health as you try to navigate something that's really complex and difficult. And and just know that most people building an online course spend 6 weeks or more doing it. So what you're being asked to do is kind of crazy, and I admire you for it. So what we've been talking about tonight really is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to designing for this environment. We really didn't get into a lot of the nuts and bolts. And so I encourage you to keep exploring. Please join groups that can help provide this support for you. And then I think that what we would like to do later is to come back with you all and or others, walk through some tools and really think through some practical ways to use these tools to help you develop and create interactions and experience with your students, as well as assessments and all of the things that you're going to need.
So Jen, before we move on, I'm going to take you back to that tip actually.
Yeah.
So we've got
Sorry.
some time to take you back. There you go. We've
We've
got
got
some
time.
time to, I think, get into some nuts and bolts.
Yeah.
And I think that really framing this in a humane way around patients and around instructional design, and sort of imagining not only the social contract between teacher and content, but really kids not necessarily knowing what's expected of them and how to behave and how to perform after multiple years in a traditional, even a creative, innovative classroom is still somewhat traditional.
Yeah.
So what I'd like to do, and we're going to open this up for questions and have a conversation, a discussion with our attendants, but I'd like to ask you a few questions based on humanities education.
Yeah.
And I know again that you've put a link I put a link in the chat box that you posted earlier. Jen, maybe take a moment and open that same document, and I'd invite any of our audience to do so. And when you open it, it's going to open on your screen, Jen, not the visible screen. Colin, I see your question, and we're definitely going to get to it. I'm going to mention to you what I consider to be some best practices of humanities education. And Jen, what I'd like you to do, if you can, without a full endorsement necessarily, but list some tools that you think might be able to accomplish this, right? So this will be a Rorschach test. I'm going I'm going to give you a big blob and you tell me what you see in it.
Mm.
Okay?
I hope I
And
pass.
yeah, well, there's no passing, but it's conversation around, again, if we're trying to simplify, then the simplification in part comes by matching it with what we try to accomplish in a history, English literature, a writing, art,
Right,
humanities class. And
right.
Colin, I'm definitely going to use your question as one of these sort of call and response I'm about to do. Okay, you ready, Jen?
I'm
And
ready.
for any of you in the room, if you've got that Word doc, that Google Doc open, you can annotate it or just simply take some notes now. So Jen, one of the things that I think is super important in humanities education is inquiry.
Yes.
Certainly in a history classroom, it's research, it's inquiry, it's choosing documents uh, to draw and conclude evidentiary argument. So what kinds of, Sean, if you scroll all the way up here, maybe I can put it in there again. I'm going to put that Google Doc. I think I can do it. Yep, there it is. Here it is one more time. So just in terms of asking students to research, going into an archive and finding documents, what's a good way to have them then present them or draw an argument with them?
Wow, so you could do so much, and I think this is kind of the really exciting part about an online learning space, where you have the opportunity to you could do several things. For example, you might have them become a particular person or take on a particular perspective, use those primary resources to support their point of view or the opposite point of view. And perhaps you give two students, um, one with one view and one with the other, the same primary documents, and then ask them to defend them. And
Okay.
so that could be done, for example, using a tool like VoiceThread. Let's say I'm asked to take on this role. I've got these primary documents. Here's my defense. And then I have a partner who is on the opposite side with the same documents, making the opposite argument. So that we might be able to present both of those.
Mhm.
And then we could potentially bring in the rest of our class to comment and or um, bring out things in that conversation and or in those documents that could be ambiguous or could be interpreted differently based on where you're coming from, which is often the case in the humanities, right?
It
So
is.
you can create role-based scenarios. You can create, and you could even just give them a set of primary documents and tell them to create something from it. Translate that into a video perhaps, or pulling in maybe modern day documents or modern day elements that didn't apply then, but make it look different now.
Right.
Um,
So
yeah,
in terms of specific tools, whether it's teacher curated resources or students go and find those resources, it sounds to me like you're also talking about annotation, right? You've got
correct.
a,
Yeah, and I can't think of the tool off the top of my head because I've not seen it since I was in third grade. Not in third grade, but teaching it. And I will try to get my hands on it for y'all if it's still available. That was a while ago. But it's a whole database of primary source documents. So um, it has images, it has text, and you probably know what I'm talking about, Andy, maybe, perhaps. Okay, Andy's going to be right back with us. Sorry, I thought maybe he couldn't hear me. So in terms of the humanities, though, there are so many opportunities here. This is also a way that if you're thinking about something that is not so concrete, students can really represent their thoughts using mind maps, using other tools that can help demonstrate the way that they're seeing relationships between and among industry and art, or history and the environment, outbreaks and business. So making these potentially or seemingly desperate things be connected. you can do that with a lot of different tools and just help students think about things in a whole different way. I do not have my chat open, but I'm going to right now. So I think that Andy you may have lost the feed from Andy. And what I can do right now, I'm just pulling this
Hello,
open.
hello, hello.
Hello? Hello.
Hey
Ain't
guys, I'm so
technology
sorry.
grand?
Yeah, what I just did was a simulation of losing power on my laptop right in the middle of a sync. I mean, seriously, could that be any more of a
Seriously,
teachable moment? I apologize, everyone.
absolutely.
My laptop literally ran out of power. I'm sorry. I was asking. I was talking about annotation and the ways that we ask students to leave replies in response to either a document or something else. So that might be an audio thread. It sounds like you're suggesting it might be a flip grid. Um, it might be a text-based discussion thread. But
Yep.
in this environment, we can ask kids to annotate materials and respond to things that we provide.
We can, and we can ask them to do that in a way that is potentially more connected for them. So if you're
Yeah,
asking a child to or a student to comment on something using their words, that's really different than asking them to annotate in the
yeah.
regular way.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's another common goal in most humanities curricula or content, and that is presentation, right? So what in your experience as a researcher and an educator, what are some really good presenter tools in this online environment? In other words, kids are demonstrating mastery of something.
Kids are demonstrating mastery, or a teacher is using a presenting tool.
Uh, Kids are in this case, in this question.
So that could take really multiple formats, and it depends on what you're asking them to do. Again, what it is you want them to demonstrate. So that could be something as simple as a Google Doc that's shared among a group where they're all contributing to the outcome of a particular um, question or scenario. That could be something like VoiceThread. And if you, I don't work for VoiceThread, just so you know. I just happened to have used this tool and found it to be really robust. And I found my students really love to hear my voice, respond to them, and give them feedback in that way. And it's actually much more human to get feedback from your instructor with their voice and or in a video than with a pen, hopefully not read. Um,
Yeah,
so I think, and it could take multiple forms. And
sure.
this is one of those situations where the tool isn't necessarily the thing, it's the way you design the experience.
Absolutely. Here's another question for you. As is the case with many faculty, our National Humanities Center Board of Trustees meeting next week will be in video conference format, and we'll be utilizing the individual room function in Zoom. In other words,
Mhm.
there's one master conference, but the moderator can assign people to different private rooms to essentially do group work or have small group
Right.
conversations. Um, are there other tools in addition to Zoom, which is sometimes limited by district, in which students can meet physically online and, I'm sorry, not physically, can meet visually online? And is there a way, to your knowledge, of us thinking about privacy in that scenario?
Hmm. Oh, that's a good question. Um, the answer is yes, there are tons of tools for them to be able to meet in that capacity. And so this could be as simple as Google Hangouts or Meets, where what I've had my students do before is I give them an assignment and I leave it up to them to coordinate their time together, but they have to meet as a group and do X. And I have no part of that. So it's not related to me. I don't set it up. They're in charge of making that happen. Um, and in terms of privacy, I think that is outside of my
Mm,
wheelhouse and skills, except to say that I think we have to be careful to use tools that are sanctioned by our communities generally when it comes to this sort of thing,
Right.
to respect things like FERPA and other privacy standards for our students. Um, that being said, if you're just asking them to meet somewhere, it's no different than asking them to meet outside of class. And so they can really take on that freedom to use the tool that works best for them.
Right. What about crowdsourcing? Are you aware of any apps or any mobile-based tools that allow for what will in this case be crowdsourcing from many different spots?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head, and I haven't thought about that for a
Mhm.
while. Maybe someone else in our group has got something.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are lots of great resources being shared right now. Here's a question from Natalie. Natalie asks, do you have any resources on how to get a text-based article, i.e. a newspaper, into a digital format? And there have been lots of different responses now in terms of Scanner Pro and other kinds of apps, Tiny Scanner app. Jen, are you aware of good ways to convert a text-based article into digital format?
I think the simplest way is going to be to create an image that either is a PDF or some other image file. Um, and it seems to me that most most of those kinds of articles would already be available archived in that kind of format. But I would say if they aren't, that seems to make the most sense. And I think some people are commenting about um, PDF formatting tools too. There are a lot of things out there,
Yeah.
a lot of
I
ways to
want to
do
go
that.
back. I want to go back to a comment that Pamela Longo made, which I think is an important one that sometimes we move away from, which is all kids are taking all of their classes online now, right? So there's not just 1 out of 6, 1 out of 7. It's
Right.
everything going to be online, and there does seem to be a saturation point where
Hmm.
either all 7 of us are doing the exact same thing, or 5 of us are, but 2 of us are going way out on in the margins and making it difficult. How do you feel about teachers in teams or by grade level or departments coordinating the kinds of activities they do so that kids aren't overwhelmed by 6 or 7 classes a day in an online format?
So I think this is a really excellent question. And just talking to someone earlier today was saying their child's going to meet every day online for PE at the same time. And I thought to myself, do you need to meet online for PE? Um, Knowing that our kids are taking anywhere between 6 or 7 courses in a day, especially in K-12, and imagining the time that each of those courses would take up, none of us can sustain that amount of time in front of a computer. So I really think that it's important when I say things like um, create a short video lecture. I mean, like 5 minutes short. I mean, really think about how much time the student is going to need to interact with a machine to get done what they need to get done. And what are the ways in which can send them out to find information or do other things that may not necessarily require them to be in front of the computer. But I
Yeah.
think that coordinating in teams is kind of fundamental right now so that we're not asking these students to be online for 7 hours a day. That's
And maybe
just.
streamlining, yeah, creating some interdisciplinary streamlining ways in which courses can support each other. I hope that
Yeah, so
in,
it's a really good opportunity for that. And so I think when I think when you popped off, I was talking about the idea of taking issues, for example, like public health, and then making that connectedness between business and or the environment and or history,
yeah,
um, knowing how all of those things are interconnected and being able to pull that together for students so that all of those pieces are more meaningful for them.
yeah, that's a great point. I hope in 2 decades we don't find that all of our students have diminished eyesight because they've been staring at screens during the coronavirus plague
Right. Yes,
pandemic.
exactly.
Here's a question. I'm going to come all the way back to Colin Baker's question. He asked it 15 minutes ago. Colin, thanks for being patient. And Colin, thanks for the nudge for in your suggestion to get this session together. It's those kinds of requests and suggestions that give us the chance to provide, I hope, what is helpful to all of you. Colin asks, what practical advice would you give for asynchronous instruction as students might not have internet access all the time? Can some type of interactive dialogue still happen between you and them as a group via an app they could download? Can a discussion group on a passage? I'm sorry, it just scrolled right out of sight as soon as I was about to finish that question. It's one of the things about this. Sorry, Colin. Can a discussion group on a passage be done by text and app that is controlled by the teacher? So is there a way, this is a little bit like crowdsourcing, I guess, and these conversations could maybe even be live. Is there a way to create is there an app that allows for, it almost sounds like a group text or a group chat.
Mm-hmm. And
Are you
I
aware
just
of
want to,
anything like that?
can you clarify for me when you said asynchronous? Did you mean asynchronous or asynchronous?
Asynchronous.
Asynchronous. So where the students can be chatting, but not online together necessarily, right?
Yep, but I'm going to
Okay.
actually, and I'll tweak Colin's question and maybe include synchronous because, I think what he's asking in part is, in Montgomery County and Blacksburg, you've got kids who don't have access to internet in the same way. And
Yeah.
is there an app or is there something they can do from their mobile device that would allow for a conversation that's teacher moderated?
So I think it depends on if you're using a learning platform in particular. Outside of that, I think that Google has a lot of ways to do that. So you can use chat um, asynchronously in Google and synchronously. Um, yeah, off the top of my head, I can't think of something else,
Hmm.
but pretty much any way that you could communicate via text, you could do that. You could harness that. But I think this is one of those places where you need to be careful about the tool that you use, and this is one of the privacy things and what you're asking students to download or not.
Yeah.
So
What
this
you're
is
asking
kind of
to
something you
download,
want guidance from your
right?
district with, yeah.
And Juliet reminds us that even if they're not on the internet, there's still data issues to consider and cell phone plans and things like that.
So I hope that you all have seen over 60 companies have now opened up Wi-Fi and free data for students. So there are things that are happening to help level that part of the playing field a little bit, which is nice to see. And I I don't think I know that I shared that earlier on Facebook today, but in that group.
Hmm.
Um, so there are national and international companies that are trying to, you know, just put their arms around these students who we know don't have what they need. And then, of course, all of that makes the assumption that they have a phone or another tool that they can use. And from what I understand, the districts are being really proactive, at least the ones I know of here, about getting them those tools, getting them a Chromebook, getting them what they need. But we do still have to really understand what their capabilities are, and if they don't have that, how do we adjust our training, our learning environment to meet those needs for them? What is the thing that we have to do to really customize this experience for each of these students, perhaps?
Jen, I appreciate that you've been willing to serve as the oracle for all things online teaching and learning tonight. And of course, in this conversation, you're sharing so many great ideas, but you don't have every idea. So I'm going to ask you a question you may not have the idea for. But I do feel like the conversation tonight has skewered mostly to older kids, kids who have certain kinds
Yes.
of digital skills, high school
Hmm.
kids, college age kids, maybe middle grades kids. But what about elementary school kids? What about kindergarten, first, second, third
Yeah.
grade kids who are also now learning online? Do you have any suggestions? I don't know that we have any elementary folks in the room tonight. I suspect we do. But what are we doing for kids who are younger and have a completely different relationship with devices?
So that's an excellent question. I've spent a lot of time actually thinking about that. And the question you asked earlier about coordinating teams and how much time they're spending is huge. It's really it really requires us to think through what we're asking them to do and what we're asking them to interact with. But I think what you can do for younger students is give them activities that don't require them to be online. Give them the opportunity to go and find something or create something, take a photo of it, and then post it. Give them the opportunity to go and write something, take a photo of it, and post it. So they can do work and share work without necessarily doing it online and in front of a computer. I know that some of the districts have been able to send home paper materials, but I don't know how realistic or sustainable that is. Um, and there are just huge issues around. Oh well, we could send them to the library, but the library is closed now.
Yeah, that's right.
So really trying to think about a child in a home with perhaps truly, truly, really limited resources. I don't have a good solution for that. I don't know what, I'm not sure there is an answer, but I think it's this requirement that we as teachers really become bendable and flexible and try to figure out how to best reach each of our students.
And it may be not just kids who don't have access, but certainly there are many families and parents who have some pretty severe and strict regulations on devices, on
Sure.
internet access, these kinds of things. So maybe the implication is to also draft assignments in which, parents have to be much more participatory than
Hmm.
just put a kid in front of the machine and leave them in a room for an hour. So
Correct.
having designing some kind of flow and structure to your design that parents can make sense of, you know, get online, see the assignment, have them, I think is a great suggestion, have them go off and do things to then report back so they're not actually online all of that time.
Right.
Um, seems to be an important thing. And Jasmine mentioned this, but I'm going to expand on her point just a little bit by saying I've also heard of many teachers who likely do this anyway, but have found it
Hmm.
really helpful to record themselves reading books and putting those
Yes.
audio files or video files
Hmm.
online so that the kids can access texts that they might not be getting at home otherwise. So it might be a really
Absolutely.
interesting way to develop a whole iTunes channel on any
Hmm.
of you reading texts and reading chapters and
Yeah.
sort of putting kids in front of that. Thanks, Jasmine. And I think you're right. Students are definitely reassured through your voice and through the confidence in which you're approaching this.
Absolutely.
What other questions do we have from the room? Here's Rhonda Watton, a good friend up in Wisconsin. Do you think it's good to have a structured schedule for students to keep them in the routine of school? That's an awesome question.
Wow, Rhonda. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Good luck with that.
It's funny, I was thinking that on the inside, but I didn't want to say it.
I mean, this is there are ideal things that we can do, and then there's the reality that our kids are home with us all day, and many of us are trying to continue to work in a job and or have to leave and don't even know what we're doing with them. So I think at this very moment, whatever structure we can provide is helpful for them and for us in many, many ways. I think the reality is that we just may not have that luxury right now.
I like Lisa's suggestion that she has an exit ticket for her students to submit to count as present in class. So there is a
Mhm.
way, much like this
Yes.
survey I'm about to launch in this webinar in a little bit.
Yeah.
Great. Other questions? Anybody else have some questions for Jen or for others in the room? Ruben works in a museum and
Yeah.
he's trying to be responsive to their audiences. Is there any way for us to be a best resource? So museums and sites, not necessarily visiting, but some kind of extension. That's a great suggestion, Ruben.
I've recently seen over the last few days it was an article that linked to a ton of museums that had online resources, which is really amazing. Um, and I think the museum space right now is hugely impacted in the same way the library space is. These are public places where we go to get this information and wonderful knowledge that we're restricted from right now. I think that our museum folks, and I have a background in this also, have to really get creative at the moment and think about how do we reach people? What are we going to do to pull them in and help them know more when it doesn't look at all like visiting a museum? Um, I think that, you know, we're again on the the issue of spending too much time on the screen, and so perhaps museums have a way to also send students out into exploration that maybe they wouldn't get in another way. I see someone's asking about Zoom. Zoom has been offered free for, I think, everyone right now, I believe.
I think it is, Heather. Zoom
Yeah.
is offering its meetings for free. And I'd also like to conclude, almost conclude tonight's session by thanking GoToTraining and its sister channels GoToWebinar and GoToMeeting. They have made all of their licenses free to both the center and to other organizations that have tried to do these bigger classes. And it may well be that any one of you can use the platform that we're using for our webinars as a teaching tool. I wouldn't encourage it to be a long session necessarily, but you could have your kids sign up using a registration button, just as you do to join this webinar. You could have a screen that's shared, and you could have a voice and audio feed, as well as the chat functions. So whether you choose to use that or not, I think it's important for me to acknowledge that GoToWebinar has been super community-based in terms of making this available.
That's great. Yeah, I just posted the Zoom link. So
well, Jen, we're just about out of time,
great.
and I'm sorry, I was just reading Raina's question. You
I
know
see
what? There's
that
going to
too.
be a lot of mixes and matches with people
Yeah.
finding a workplace. I'm going to give Jedediah the last question of the night. He asks a question that, again, is one of those unintended consequences. Jen, do you have any ideas of how you can help a student teacher navigate through this?
So I think that what we're experiencing right now is just unprecedented, and every district, every university is trying to figure out how we do that. I think that you can still bring a student teacher along into this space. I think this is probably the best lesson they could probably ever experience. That being said, we can't put them in a real classroom right now, obviously. And so I just think the measures for and the requirements for being a student teacher are going to have to flex and change for the time being. And we're seeing that in assessment for the universities. We're seeing it in standardized assessments for schools. We're seeing it in credits. We're seeing it in how we're going to graduate students. It's really it's a complicated endeavor. But I do think you can mentor and bring a student teacher along in as much as you can help guide them through what you're going through at the moment.
Jen Elliott, I want to thank you again for joining us tonight and leading the
Thank
conversation.
you.
I would encourage everybody in the audience to copy that Google document link, share it with your friends and your colleagues, add to it if you like. We will be sharing the recording of tonight's session along with all of our resources. I think tomorrow morning, Libby's got it as a priority. And I'm also going to save the chat box because there's so many great interactions, and we'll share the chat text with you as well. Please do join the National Humanities Center for future opportunities. They're all going to be online for the moment. You can follow us through our website and email us, as well as our Twitter handles and our Facebook page. I do want to encourage you to join us at our next scheduled webinar. Right now it's March 31st. We'll be working with Phil Deloria, who is a professor of history at Harvard, on American Indians and the American cultural imagination. It's likely that we're going to try to work some other resources in before then that address this need for teaching online and the coronavirus pandemic. So please do keep an eye out for those, and hopefully they'll be helpful. Rhonda, I'm going to post that link one more time so you can all grab it. Please, everyone, be healthy. Take care of your kids. Take care of your families. We'll see you again next time on the Humanities in Class webinar. I'm sorry, I said all of that wrong because I was distracted by Bruce's great comment. Thank you again for joining us in the National Humanities Center Humanities in Class webinar series. Hey, Jen, thanks a lot. We'll see you next
Thank
time.
you. Take care. Y'all be safe.